Thank you for joining us in Finding God in the World of Video Games. Today we're going to take a look at backwards compatibility and the plans for both Sony's PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X and how they intend to address that. And each and every console launch announcement, pretty much from the dawn of time until now, has typically been filled with the same questions. How much will it cost?
How powerful will it be?
When is it going to come out?
Will it look like a small refrigerator?
And in the case of the Xbox Series X, we actually have to answer that question. The answers are probably a lot, very powerful, very soon, and it absolutely is going to look like a mini fridge that you would find on any college campus. But surrounded by all of these very relevant inquiries, we will inevitably get down, time and time again, to the question of backwards compatibility.
Regardless of how incredible the graphical improvements look, how powerful the processors are, or how expensive the system will be, we will still ask, can it play my old games?
Well, one of the key differentiators between the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3 during that console cycle was the physical backwards compatibility support. And this continued not only into the PS4 and Xbox One area that we're currently in, but it's going into the upcoming console launches this holiday season. And once again, we see two very different tactics from each manufacturer. Microsoft, with their Xbox, is unleashing a massive strike with a huge library of backwards compatible titles stretching all the way back to the very first original Xbox, which means your very first physical copy of Halo Combat Evolved will actually run in a console that is being launched almost 20 years later. No weird hoops to jump through, just put the disc in and play it. And I really like that. PlayStation, they're showing a much more, we'll call it curated approach. That's a nice way of saying they're not doing quite as much. They're promising that the top 100 PS4 games will be playable sometime around the launch of the PS5, with a hope or at least a plan for more titles to be added in gradually.
With such contrasting takes on the issue of backwards compatibility, it's fair to ask if this is more of a perception of need versus a reality. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, personally, I prefer the largest possible library of games, and I do enjoy dipping my toes back into some of my old favorites from time to time, but we do need to look at the facts. And we can't find a perfect measurement for how many people actually take advantage of this feature or leverage it as a purchasing decision, but we can look at sales as an indicator. And it is crystal clear that the PlayStation 4 completely dominated this console generation. They sold over 108 million units compared to Microsoft Xbox One's 47 million. And there's more than just the backwards compatibility as a factor that why Sony won in such a landslide victory. But the truth is that the Xbox provided the largest amount of options to a huge library of all your old games on their new console. They still got outsold globally by both PlayStation and Nintendo.
So now I have to ask an even tougher question. Is backwards compatibility truly critical when choosing your next console, or is it simply a sentimental choice that is less important than we really think it is?
Well, I can only speak from my personal experience. And if I had to be honest, I'd probably place less than 5 physical Xbox 360 games into my Xbox One for the entire time that I've owned it. While I appreciate the option and enjoy the flexibility it provides, the reality is I didn't buy a new system to play my old games. I bought it to play new games, visit new places, and hopefully get to know new characters, or at least expanding on the adventures of characters that I've enjoyed. Now, I love Halo 3, but I don't want or need an Xbox Series X to keep playing that old game. I want it so I can play Halo Infinite and move forward with that story. It seems that each console is either blessed or doomed to carry the burden of the previous generation's console on their back as they attempt to find their way through the global marketplace. The perception as well as the reality surrounding each of their predecessors absolutely influences the actions that each company takes when they're presenting their new console, and it also colors the public's decision on which ones to purchase. And as the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X attempt to find their footing in the treacherous console war that looms ahead, they will do so carrying the sins of their fathers in terms of their old consoles along the way. And you might be surprised to know this happens in our spiritual lives much the same way. Does that sound crazy? Well, let's get crazy. No, let's not get crazy. But we are going to go back into the biblical record and see how this pattern plays out throughout the Bible. And the Bible tends to call it a phrase, generational curses. And if we're going to talk about identifying these and breaking these, we have to identify them and see them for what they truly are. Many times it can be hard to understand why we struggle with maybe a specific temptation or sin or a challenge in our life. Some families can be unaffected by substance abuse, while other ones, they see it up, down, and diagonally throughout their family tree. Depression can leave many of us alone and pass undetected generation through generation in an entirely different family who lives in the exact same neighborhood, maybe right next door. So as a jumping off point, we'll start with Abraham, Father Abraham, patriarch of the nation of Israel. And we talked about him previously before, living this nomadic life with Sarah, and how she was so beautiful that she would inspire the men around her to want to commit homicide. And so during his travels, Abraham would try to keep a low profile and claim to be her brother instead of her husband.
And he did this twice, actually. Twice. That we know of.
Yeah, twice that is documented. During both of those instances, Abraham's son Isaac was not even born yet. That's important to understand, because in Genesis chapter 26, verses 6 through 11, we see Abraham's son Isaac. Remember, he hadn't been born when his father did these things. It could not be a learned behavior. He did the exact same thing. As a matter of fact, he did it with the exact same key in Abimelech that Abraham had done it last. Abimelech, apparently, he had a thing for married women. What can you do? But Isaac couldn't have observed it from his father. I don't think that Abraham wrote a book called My Sister, My Wife, A Traveler's Guide, and passed that down to Isaac. But if we look at Exodus 34, maybe we can understand what is commonly known as a generation curse. And you see where God is talking to Moses and the people, and he's explaining how the iniquities of sin can pass from one generation to another generation. There are spiritual transgressions that can afflict multiple generations, even when that particular challenge has not been observed, it has not been taught, and it's not being encouraged. Perhaps you or someone you know have struggled with thoughts or desires or habits that you don't understand or have difficulty controlling. And I can tell you right now, the answer is not to bury that in shame and just hope that it goes away. Because even if you manage to suppress it just through an act of sheer will and determination, it may still live on. And those you care about the most, your children. We have to learn how to break the cycle. So it's time to find some answers. And in Mark 9, we find the case of Jesus Christ himself being confronted with a demonically oppressed child. The spirit that had possessed his child repeatedly tried to force him to commit suicide, and it stripped him of his ability to speak. There's no amount of self-help books or positive thinking that was going to change the situation. It required deliverance from the hands of Christ himself. You read on through, you will see that Jesus removed this evil spirit from the child. And when the disciples came and asked him, what happened here? Why couldn't we cast it out? Jesus did explain to them that this could not have occurred except through prayer and fasting.
And this is why Jesus came to earth, to deliver us from the oppression of sin right now and the consequences of that sin in the life to come.
And that is honestly one of the more extreme examples in the Bible, but the reality is we all have our battles to fight, and we cannot win them alone. We may not have invited these problems into our lives, but the good news is whether we inherited them or invited them, the same solution sets us free. Our faith in the combination of God's power, along with our will to reach out to him, is all that it takes to break the chains of whatever generational curses or sin patterns that we've been afflicted with.
We all inherited the sins of our first father, Adam, and unfortunately share the horrible consequences of that decision. We also have equal access to redemption and freedom that can only be found in Christ. He alone can break whatever old cycles of trauma and cursed hand-me-downs that we may carry.
So as we wrap up this exploration, and I know it's very brief, of generational curses and what we unconsciously inherit and carry with us, it's important to know that the Father chose the line of Abraham and his son Isaac to be the seed that would eventually blossom into the birth of Jesus Christ. Both the curse of the inherited generational sins as well as the fountain of blessing that brought about the salvation of the entire human race came from the same place, the same line. And similarly, even with the baggage and the battles we personally face, the ability to serve as a conduit for Christ and his power is ours to access freely and without shame. The freedom from our past, from temptations, from the unwanted desires and uninvited thoughts, it's only available through one channel: open and honest prayer and submission to the only one powerful enough to break those chains. Now, some of those chains may be broken in just one simple command from the Lord, like we see in Mark 5. Then there are some others that may require daily submission to His will in order to keep us from trying to become self-sufficient. You see that when Paul's talking in 2 Corinthians 12. But either way, we do not have to allow them to continue to affect us or future generations. We can stop them in their tracks, we can submit them to Christ, and we will watch our enemy flee. Sony and Microsoft's newest consoles are honestly, they're continuing down the path of their predecessors. Microsoft is choosing to openly embrace backwards compatibility. Sony's, they're being a little bullish about it. And I'm anxious to see what the future is going to hold on the strategies for each of them.
We have a choice to break any generational curses and embrace the freedom that Christ provided us through His sacrificial death. The ability to start fresh and new without the weight of the baggage we inherited to weigh us down.
So while we may have to see how this backward compatibility thing plays out, we have great news for you. You do not have to take the backwards compatibility that has been passed on from generation to generation in your family and allow that to continue to affect you. Bring it to Christ in prayer and submit it to Him. He can break all of those chains.